Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It started as something that seemed so ordinary, so innocent, that no one could have guessed where it would eventually lead. Sometimes, the choices we make in the smallest moments can change everything. This story isn't about something planned, nor is it about a simple mistake. It's about how comfort, loneliness, and hidden feelings can come together to create a situation that's almost impossible to walk away from. And once it begins, stopping it becomes even harder. She was a woman in her late 20s, trying to rebuild her life after a difficult marriage. He was in his early 20s, a young man just beginning to figure out who he really was. Their paths crossed under one roof, not by choice but by circumstance. At first, their connection felt like family, two people living in the same home, sharing conversations that lasted too long into the night, small glances that lingered a little more than they should have. Neither of them said anything out loud, but both could feel that invisible pull growing stronger every day. The night it all shifted was quiet, almost too quiet. Rain tapped gently against the window, and the house seemed larger than usual, emptier, filled with the weight of silence. She had trouble sleeping, tossing and turning, and somehow, they both ended up in the same room. The bed was wide enough for two, but still, lying so close to one another made the air heavy. At first, it was supposed to be nothing more than sharing space. No one expected anything else. But the moment stretched, the silence turned into awareness, and every breath they took seemed to echo. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have gotten up and left the room? Or would you have stayed, justifying it as harmless? That's the question that lingers, because sometimes we don't recognize the danger of temptation until it's already too late. And when two people want the same thing but are too afraid to say it out loud, the silence itself becomes louder than words. She remembers the first time his hand brushed against hers, accidental, maybe or maybe not. Her heart raced, and for a moment she considered pulling away, but she didn't. He didn't either. That one choice, that one pause, set everything in motion. What followed wasn't planned, and it wasn't spoken about. But it also wasn't stopped. This story is about desire, about boundaries blurred in the quiet hours of the night, about how one decision can grow into something neither person expected. It's about the kind of connection that feels wrong on the surface, but undeniable underneath. And as much as she wanted to convince herself it was nothing, deep down she knew this was just the beginning. The days before that night almost feel like a blur now, but if you look closely, you can see how everything was quietly building up to it. They weren't strangers. They had already spent countless evenings under the same roof, sharing meals, watching movies, and sometimes just sitting in silence when words weren't needed. It was in those small moments, when they'd laugh over something silly or exchange a glance that lingered too long, that the line between comfort and curiosity started to fade. She had always told herself that what she felt was harmless. After all, people get close when they live together. It's natural to care for one another. But deep down, she also knew there was something different in the way her heart reacted whenever he walked into the room. His presence was too heavy to ignore, and no matter how much she tried to brush it off, her emotions betrayed her. He wasn't just another young man to her. There was something about his energy, the way he looked at her like he truly saw her, that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. For him, the feelings were just as complicated. On the surface, he played it cool. He laughed, he joked, he acted like nothing was out of the ordinary. But in private, when no one else was around, his eyes would soften, and the space between them seemed charged with something neither dared to name. He was young, but he wasn't naive. He knew the danger of wanting something he shouldn't, yet the more he tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. It was in the late hours that their connection felt most undeniable. The house would grow still, shadows stretched across the walls, and suddenly the distance between them seemed to shrink. They would sit close on the couch, sometimes too close, brushing shoulders as if by accident. She would laugh at his stories, he would lean in when she spoke, and both of them felt the kind of quiet longing that words couldn't capture. That's why the night they shared the bed didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of every small choice, every stolen glance, every unspoken thought that had led them there. And now, neither of them could pretend it was just coincidence. The silence between them carried weight, and the air seemed to hum with what was unsaid. She tried to calm her racing heart by reminding herself that nothing had really happened yet. It was just two people in the same bed, nothing more. But then she remembered the way his hand had brushed hers earlier, how it lingered for just a second too long. That memory replayed in her mind like a secret she couldn't silence. The conflict grew inside her. Was she lonely? Was she just seeking comfort? Or was this something much deeper, something she had been denying for too long? And for him, lying so close, the questions were just as heavy. Should he pull away, create distance before it went any further? Or should he stay still and wait, hoping she would be the one to make the next move? Every second stretched out endlessly, and the suspense only grew stronger. They both knew that if they crossed the line, there would be no going back. But the hardest part wasn't deciding what to do, it was admitting to themselves what they already wanted. The night didn't give them answers, only more questions. And as the hours slipped away, both of them were left wondering if the tension between them would ever truly fade, or if this was only the beginning of something neither could control. The following morning, nothing was spoken about the night they had shared the bed. She moved through the house as if everything was normal, preparing breakfast, tidying up, avoiding his eyes more than usual. He, on the other hand, tried to act casual, joking about the weather and pouring his coffee like any other day. But both of them knew that nothing felt the same anymore. The silence between them was louder than words, and the smallest glance seemed to carry a hidden meaning. The conflict wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what it meant. She found herself questioning everything. Was she imagining the way he looked at her, the way his smile lingered longer than necessary? Or was he feeling the same weight of unspoken emotions? She kept telling herself that she should pull back, set boundaries, and stop this before it spiraled into something bigger. Yet, every time she heard his voice or saw him walk into the room, those thoughts melted away. The comfort he gave her was something she hadn't felt in years. For him, the struggle was just as real. He was young, yes, but he wasn't blind. He noticed the way her laughter softened when he spoke, the way she seemed more alive when they were together. Still, part of him worried. What if this was all in his head? What if she saw him only as someone to lean on and nothing more? Those questions haunted him, but they didn't stop the way his chest tightened when she brushed past him or the way his heart raced when they accidentally locked eyes. The people around them began to notice their closeness too, even if no one said it outright. A neighbor once made a passing comment about how comfortable they seemed together. A family friend teased her about how much time she spent talking to him. These small remarks, innocent on the surface, carried a sting that made her heart pound. Were others beginning to see what she was trying so hard to hide? That fear only fueled the inner conflict. On one hand, she wanted to step back, to avoid suspicion and protect herself. On the other hand, she couldn't deny how drawn she was to him. Every time she tried to distance herself, something always pulled them back together, a late-night conversation, a shared laugh, or even just sitting in silence, feeling the quiet energy between them. There were nights when she lay awake, replaying everything in her head. She thought about the choices she had made, the way she had let him get so close, and she wondered if she had already gone too far. Could she really go back to pretending nothing was happening? And more importantly, did she even want to? He wrestled with his own questions. Should he confess how he felt and risk ruining everything? Or should he keep pretending, waiting for her to make the first move? Each day the tension built, and each night the silence grew heavier. Neither of them spoke the truth, but both lived in it, carrying the same secret in their hearts. This is where the real conflict lies, not in what they had done, but in what they hadn't done yet. The suspense of unspoken feelings, the fear of being discovered, the pull between right and wrong. And that's what makes this story even more unpredictable. The pressure between them grew heavier with each passing day. What began as quiet glances and harmless moments was now impossible to ignore. Every time they were in the same room, it felt as if the walls were closing in, trapping them inside a tension neither of them could escape. She tried to distract herself with daily routines, pretending everything was fine, but the truth followed her everywhere. Even the simplest moments, pouring coffee in the kitchen, brushing past him in the hallway, carried an energy that left her breathless. He felt it too. He couldn't focus on much else anymore. Conversations that used to be light and casual now felt loaded, like each word had a hidden meaning. Sometimes he would catch her staring just a moment too long before quickly looking away. And those stolen seconds kept replaying in his mind long after. The line between reality and imagination blurred, and he wondered how long they could go on like this before something broke. The outside world seemed to sense it as well. A family dinner ended with a relative joking about how close the two of them had become. The laughter that followed felt sharp, almost exposing, and she forced a smile to cover the unease that churned inside her. Later that night, when the house grew quiet again, those words echoed in her mind. Was it really so obvious? Were they fooling anyone at all, or were they only fooling themselves? The nights became the hardest. They would find themselves alone in the living room, watching television that neither of them was really paying attention to. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the unspoken questions neither dared to ask. Sometimes, their hands would brush against each other on the couch, and the electricity of that tiny touch was enough to keep her awake for hours afterward. Her thoughts spiraled in circles. She told herself she should end this, create distance, maybe even leave for a while. Yet every time she tried to step away, something drew her right back in. She couldn't explain it. It was more than attraction, more than comfort. It was like an invisible thread tied them together, pulling them closer no matter how much they tried to resist. He wrestled with his own fears. Was he pushing her into something she didn't truly want, or was she just as caught up as he was? He waited for a sign, some confirmation that this wasn't just in his head. And slowly, piece by piece, she was giving it. The suspense thickened when one night, they found themselves standing too close in the hallway. The house was dark, quiet, and for a moment, it felt as though the world outside no longer existed. Their eyes locked, neither of them moving, as if time itself had frozen. This was the point where everything could change. One step forward, one small decision, and the line between them would be gone forever. But would they take it? Or would fear win in the final moment? The silence in that dark hallway lingered, heavy and charged, as if one breath could change everything. Neither of them moved, but the moment itself spoke louder than words. Then, just as the air grew unbearably tense, the sound of footsteps echoed from another part of the house. A door creaked open, and the spell shattered. They quickly stepped back, pretending nothing was happening, but the truth burned in their eyes. That was the first twist, the reminder that no matter how alone they felt, someone could always be watching. The interruption left them restless, but it didn't erase what had just happened. In fact, it only made it clearer. They were walking on a knife's edge, and one wrong move could expose everything. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the universe was trying to warn her. Maybe they had already gone too far with these stolen moments, even without a word spoken. But another part of her whispered that the risk made it impossible to turn away. For him, the footsteps in the hallway weren't a warning, they were a challenge. The more they tried to fight it, the stronger the pull became. He found himself seeking her out, lingering a little longer in the kitchen when she was there, starting conversations that didn't need to be had, just so he could stay close. He knew it was dangerous, but the thought of losing the chance to feel what he felt was unbearable. The second twist came days later, unexpected and uninvited. Someone outside their walls began asking questions. A neighbor, curious and perhaps a little too observant, mentioned that they had been seen together often grocery shopping, laughing by the car, walking back home late in the evening. To an outsider, it might look perfectly normal. But the way the words were delivered, slow, deliberate, with raised eyebrows, felt like an accusation wrapped in casual conversation. She felt her stomach drop. Was it really that noticeable already? This changed everything. It wasn't just about the two of them anymore. The world outside was beginning to notice, and the danger of discovery added another layer of tension they couldn't ignore. Suddenly, every interaction felt like it was under a spotlight. Every time they were in the same room, she wondered if someone was watching, waiting, piecing things together. Yet the strange thing about danger is that it doesn't always push people apart. Sometimes it pulls them closer. Now, the secrecy wasn't just about unspoken feelings, it was about protecting something fragile, something that felt too real to let go of. The risk of being discovered became part of the thrill, even if it terrified them both. She tried to create distance after the neighbor's remark, avoiding long conversations and choosing different rooms. But no matter how hard she tried, it only made the connection between them stronger. Absence didn't make it fade, it made the longing sharper. And the more she fought it, the more impossible it became to hide. He noticed her pulling away and felt torn between respecting her silence and breaking it. Should he confront her, confess what he felt, and risk everything? Or should he hold back, waiting for her to give the sign he needed? Each choice carried consequences that neither of them was ready to face. The stakes had never been higher. Their secret was no longer just a private struggle, it was becoming a story that others might soon discover. And as much as they wanted to resist, the truth was undeniable. The closer they came to being caught, the more irresistible the connection became. The weight of suspicion finally became too much to ignore. Every glance from the neighbors, every teasing remark from family, every quiet whisper seemed to close in on them like walls narrowing around a secret. She realized there was no more running from it. Whatever was happening between them had to be faced head-on. One night, when the house was silent and the world outside seemed far away, she found him in the living room, sitting in the dark. He looked up at her as though he had been waiting all along. The tension between them was unbearable, but this time, neither of them stepped back. Words tumbled out, hesitant at first, then pouring like a flood. She admitted she had been fighting feelings she couldn't explain, that she had tried to ignore them but failed. He confessed he had felt the same from the start, too afraid to say anything, too afraid of what it meant. Their honesty was raw, messy, but it was the truth. And in that truth, the walls they had built finally crumbled. For the first time, they weren't hiding behind glances or silence. They knew the risk, the weight of every choice, yet in that moment, none of it mattered. The pull between them was stronger than fear. The suspense of weeks and months came crashing into one undeniable reality. They were no longer imagining it. They were living it. But just when the air seemed to settle, when it felt like the storm inside them had finally found its release, the final twist revealed itself. The neighbor who had been watching them, the one who had dropped hints and raised suspicions, was closer than they thought. That very night, as they sat together in the dim room, a knock echoed at the door. The timing was too sharp, too deliberate. She froze, heart racing, while he glanced toward the sound with alarm. When the door opened, the neighbor stood there with a look that carried more than curiosity. It wasn't just about noticing their closeness anymore, it was about knowing. The questions came in carefully chosen words, laced with meaning, as if daring them to deny what was already clear. Suddenly, their private truth was no longer safe. The secret they thought belonged only to them was hanging by a thread. And that was the twist neither of them expected. Their connection, once hidden in shadows, was now at the edge of exposure. They had resolved their feelings for each other, admitted what they could no longer deny, but now the real question remained. Would the outside world allow them to keep it, or would it tear everything apart? That knock on the door changed everything. For a moment, it felt like the walls of their secret life were about to collapse. But instead of accusations or judgment, the neighbors' questions turned out to be nothing more than gossip disguised as concern. They answered carefully, keeping their voices steady, and when the door finally closed, they were left shaken but relieved. The scare forced them to confront the truth. If they wanted this bond to last, they couldn't let outside whispers control their every move. In the days that followed, something shifted. The fear that had once paralyzed them slowly gave way to clarity. They no longer danced around their feelings or pretended nothing was there. Instead, they started to talk, really talk, about what they wanted, what they feared, and how they could move forward. It wasn't easy. Every conversation carried weight, and the possibility of being misunderstood lingered like a shadow. But honesty became their anchor. She found strength in admitting how much she had longed for connection after years of emptiness. He, in turn, found peace in knowing his feelings weren't one-sided. Together, they began to shape their story not around secrecy but around choice. The outside world would always have opinions, but what mattered most was how they faced it together. The subplot with the neighbor slowly faded too. Curiosity gave way to silence when no scandal surfaced, and the whispers that once haunted them lost their power. Life returned to its steady rhythm, but within that rhythm was a bond stronger than before. They no longer lived in fear of the tension breaking them apart. Instead, they embraced it as proof of how deep their connection had grown. The resolution wasn't about a dramatic confession to everyone around them. It was about peace between the two of them, about finally understanding that love doesn't always follow rules or expectations. Sometimes it shows up in the quietest places, in the moments you least expect, and it challenges you to decide what kind of story you're willing to write. As their story closed, what remained was a lesson about choice and consequence, about how desire can test boundaries, but honesty can create healing. They chose not to let suspicion or fear dictate their lives. Instead, they chose to face the world together, no matter what came next. And that's the ending, quiet, real, and deeply human. The kind that makes you reflect on your own life. How do you feel about the way their story wrapped up? Did it end the way you expected, or did the final twist surprise you? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to see a sequel exploring what happens after, make sure to share your thoughts. Your voice shapes what comes next. Summary: this is a true infidelity story about a woman and her stepson whose quiet moments slowly turned into unspoken feelings. What began with simple closeness grew into deep tension, outside suspicion, and a life-changing choice. In the end, they found honesty, clarity, and strength to face their truth together.